I'm 80 years old, and as I look back on my life, two we'll call them adventures that I, or two opportunities, let's put it that way, that I have always praised the Lord that I could enjoy. One being a kid out there at Hanford, and the other, believe it or not, to be able to go through the United States Marine Corps boot camp. That was a great opportunity for me. I loved it. In both cases, I loved it. And as a takeoff on that question, if you don't mind, that first summer, 43 there, one of the things that I enjoyed most was going across the river and climbing around and hiking around the bluffs. I call it my playground. And the thing, they had a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week ferry. That ferry never stopped. Just back. It was not a big ferry. It was a tug pushed barge that would hold 4 or 5 automobiles, and that it just went back and forth, and it didn't cost anything. Again, it was free for the employees, you know. And the kids would go down there, and we'd cross the river and go hiking on the bluffs, and you know, chase rabbits and kill rattlesnakes, and just had a good time. Yeah. So that really was great, though. Yeah. I don't know if you want to take time or not on that. I brought a piece of aluminum, though, which that's kind of unique. But anyway, piece of aluminum that came off of an airplane. One evening, toward evening, it was 5, 6, 7 o'clock. One of the aircraft from the Naval Training Center there in Pasco. It was a dive bomber. Had come around and from the south, and the bluffs, of course, were across the river to the north. Very low altitude, and the engine was sputtering some, and I mean, pretty obvious it was in trouble. And they were able to clear the bluffs by a couple hundred yards, maybe 400 or 500 feet, but then it crashed and it burned. And so some of the men went out and got souvenirs, and the instructor and the student pilot were both killed in that crash. But yeah, it was unfortunate. But that was kind of interesting that they came through there.
And this is when you were living at the camp there?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and they just came right over the Hanford Site there, the Hanford town site. Yeah, it was. We didn't see many of the planes from Pasco there. I suppose a few that we saw came in on cross country training plane. But that, talking about airplanes, we have to talk about the big airplane. Yes, we have to talk, I would hope anyway, about day's pay. Now, first of all, I want to correct something, that the idea that day's pay landed at some airstrip out at, the little town site to the west of Hanford, White Bluffs. That some would have you to believe that, but day's pay, when it came in, when it was flown in, it landed on the highway about a mile west of the school there. It landed right, and there was plenty of room. It made a great landing strip. It was straight and no hills or whatever. It landed there and then taxied up to the school within 100 feet of the school and parked cut its engines, and they got out and did their thing. They christened it, and there was a lady there that christened it, and they had their ceremony, and then it started up, taxied back to that highway strip, and took off to the west. And so that's where Days Pay landed and took off. And for those who are not familiar with the Days Pay thing, the reason it was named Days Pay is all of the construction workers there at Hanford, building what we know as the Hanford Works, donated to Days Pay to buy that B-17 bomber. And so anyway.
Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about when you went to work at Hanford then. When was that, and what sort of work did you do there?
Can we come back to this other for a minute?
Oh, sure, yeah.
No, before we finish it? Yeah, okay, yeah. And, yeah, again, praise the Lord, I was able to, right after finishing high school in 1951, and by the way, I graduated from Columbia High School in Richland. Well, it wasn't immediately after that. I had to get healed up from a broken ankle first. But by August of 1951, I was able to go into construction work, and I went to work helping build the 100C area, which was right adjacent to 100B. And so that's where I started my construction work, and I worked there until September of 1952, at which time I started college. And so the rest, the several years after that, then I would work in the summers, or if I had a real good job, I'd work the summer and maybe a winter quarter, spring quarter, whatever, and in construction. So my term, I helped build 100C, helped build Purex, and then in the mid-50s, I helped build, I don't know how many thousands of yards of concrete I hauled from the batch plant to the 100K east and west basins, and when they're putting the basins in. And so, which was an excellent job, and made good money, and was able to go back to school there after about 6 months. Then after that, after I got my degree, then I went into teaching, but as things would have it, I went to work back at Hanford in 1967. At that time, it was for what they call ITT-FSS. They had the fire department, security, and several other responsibilities, and I went to work there for a couple of years. Then after that, actually, I didn't work at what is known as Hanford Works until the Bweb Project. And most people are not aware of the what is called the Bweb Project. Bweb, BWIP, stands for Basalt Waste Isolation Project. They were going to, or at least check on the feasibility of going down into the basalt under the Hanford Site and have storage for nuclear waste in containers. But politics being as it was, that didn't happen. BWIP and several other projects that they were experimenting with throughout the United States went to Yucca Mountain and died, or at least is still dead, may come back. But anyway, I went to work on the Bweb, but that didn't last long because they abandoned that job. And then it wasn't until about 1983 or 4 that I went back to work at what we call the Hanford Site, and off and on there, and working on the 2 commercial sites that eventually in 1996 I retired. So all told, if that's of any interest, all told, I spent about 10 years working at what we would call Hanford, in operations or construction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of the different sort of jobs and places at Hanford Site that you worked, was there a job that was sort of the most rewarding, that you found the most rewarding, enjoyed the most, or one that was sort of the most challenging or difficult? Or?
Well, going back to August of 1951 there, I went to work in construction, and I was working through the union, driving truck. I mean, I had some experience in that during high school, and so I was driving a flatbed truck, and one day I went to the boss and I said, Charlie, I really appreciate this job, and I said, but I said, could I maybe drive a dump truck, or get some experience? Oh, sure, Bob. Yeah, we'll fix you right up. So he said, go out. See that Euclid out there? This is a huge, to me, a huge piece of diesel powered, and it would haul about 10 yards of dirt and all. He said, yeah, go climb on that Euc and take it over here to this power shovel and work with them today, And anyway, I went out, and make a long story short, I finally got it started with some help from some other guys, because I'd never driven diesel before. But this was the largest earth-moving equipment that they had out there at the time. And so I operated the Ukes for about a year, and I loved it. That was the most interesting part of, I think, my construction. And of that work, the most important and most interesting was we, right down to the north from the B reactor there, we put in a new, I guess they call it a siphon, to draw water out of the Columbia River. We had to go about 100 yards out into the river and built a levee for them to eventually lower the pipe after it was welded, lower the pipe down to the floor of the river. And so hauling dirt out to the end of that, and you had to back the whole way and dump the earth. That was quite a challenge. So I enjoyed that. But the other very interesting thing really didn't have anything to do with the Hanford site. It did have to do with what we know today as, well, what we knew then as Unit Number 2, which was, today it's known as, Power Northwest, or
Energy Northwest? Energy Northwest?
Energy Northwest, yeah. Their number 2 unit out there is, I was a welding inspector on all of the welding and all for the structural steel that went on top of the reactor building, including the overhead crane. And that was I had never done that type of work before. I'd never walked steel before, and I haven't walked steel since then, and I never will walk steel again. But that was very interesting, and it was very important work, and it was all nuclear grade welding, and so it was That was very fascinating. Even though that wasn't technically connected with the Hanford site, it was on the Hanford site anyway.
Sure.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was very good, very good. I don't know if you had.
I have a question about when you actually then moved to the town of Richland. What was that like? I mean, what was Richland like in the late 1940s then?
Very, very good question. And it was very different, and I suppose that was true also of Kennewick and Pasco. It was a melting pot. People from all over the country, and which is true at Hanford too, but very interesting. A lot of people had come up from the south for the construction. Some people came up from the south and all to work in operations. And people like us had come in from Missoula, Montana. They'd come in from all over the country, South Dakota, North Dakota, all over. And it was true at Hanford, and it became true really at Richland too. Many of these people, especially out of the South, had worked at that time, 1943, even during the war years, had worked for maybe $1 a day. And they came to Hanford in construction out there, and laborers were making, I think, about $1.10 an hour. This was great. Many people moved into Richland, ourselves included. Mom and Dad had never owned a home. It had always been a rental home in the, almost 20 years that they'd been married. They were provided nice houses. All the coal was furnished. They had to pay for their own phone. They had to pay for their own electricity. But I think the water and sewer was provided, all the coal. It was great. It was a new world. It was a new world for a lot of people, including the Sheas. And Dad appreciated it, Mom appreciated it, and they took very good care of things. And I don't think they took advantage of anything, but they enjoyed it. It's kind of interesting, I think. Alice and I share this every once in a while. Along toward 47, 48, in that time frame, maybe 49 too, it was not uncommon that a neighbor might come to you in Richland there and say, well, it's been nice having you as a neighbor, and we wish you well and all that. We're being reassigned. And you would have to reassigned. You're going to go to different jobs. Yeah, I get different jobs. Well, as it turned out, several plainclothes FBI agents lived with their families in the city of Richland there. And because at that time they were checking pretty carefully about communists. And of course it wasn't too long after that McCarthy in the U.S. Senate with McCarthyism there and all, and big communist situation there as far as seeking them out. So that was kind of interesting. And there were, unfortunately, some families, the dad would be approached and just say, okay, pack up, you're out of here, your kids aren't behaving as they should be, or maybe they were a drunk or what. In other words, it was pretty tight, and it was kind of interesting too until probably 1950 or maybe even later. There was a kind of a police headquarters, which was really government control, but that the headquarters there, and they had police officers throughout the city, but nothing real heavy. But if and this happened to us, if people from out of town would come, relatives from podunk corners or wherever it was, would come to town and they'd stop it. They'd see, well, here's a police headquarters. We'll check and see where the Shays live because we're confused. And they would just be escorted. If they stopped with the police there, the police would escort them right to our home, and they'd say, "Do you know these folks?" And, well, yeah, this is Uncle George or whoever, Oh, okay, that's fine. You know them. That's good. We weren't sure what the deal was, so we brought them over.
Wow.
So that was kind of interesting. So
yeah, it's very tight security.
Tight security, yeah, tight security, and I think that lasted pretty much, I think, until mid-50s probably. Yeah, yeah.
So in terms of security then, when you started working there in the 50s, did you have to have special clearance? Was there training about security too when you worked there?
You had to fill out some paperwork. It was in construction phase there. It was pretty loose, not much, but in 1955, when I went one summer, when I was off from college, I went to work for what was known at that time J.A. Jones Construction Services, and I was going to be working some in D and DR and F areas, and I had to qualify with a Q clearance. So I got a Q clearance there in 1955, and I had it restated later too. In fact, when I retired, I had a Q clearance. Not too many had it at that time. For some reason, they had lowered the standard some. But yeah, so yeah, it was tight. Yeah, it was very tight. And you've probably heard about the aircraft the patrol aircraft that flew. The main reason for the Richland airport was to accommodate the half dozen Piper Cubs, really, that were constantly doing surveillance work over the Hanford Site for, well, all of the 40s and probably, I would guess until 1954, 55. When, or maybe a little bit before that, after the Army moved in anyway, and there was tighter security there. But the security was tight, yeah, very tight.
You have something else you want to get back to that we were talking about before? Or
we could go back to Hanford, but I might mention one thing for anybody that's kind of interested in sports. And this is kind of off the... Anyway, there at Hanford, and after that, they had a MP, or military police detachment, of U.S. Army personnel. And they were, of course, most of them are pretty young men and all. And they had some good teams, softball teams and all. But a little sidelight, one of the MPs, after he got out of the Army there in late 1945, he went to various colleges around the area and universities, and tried to get a football scholarship. He played a little high school football and all, and so they all said, well, no, thanks, but no, we're in pretty good shape. So, okay, well, that's fine. So he decided, well, I'll just go back home. So he went back home to Illinois. And then in 1947, he reappeared in the Rose Bowl. And he was the quarterback for Illinois. And they proceeded to beat UCLA something like 45-14. But his name was Perry Moss. Perry Moss. And he'd been a GI MP out here at Hanford. So, yeah, so I thought that was kind of interesting. going back to Hanford there. Oh, two things I might mention that were very significant and very important, not to me or my family, but to, I'm sure that many of the guys in the and some of the guys in the trailer court, probably some of the fathers and maybe older boys, they had some excellent baseball leagues out there. Again, black leagues, white leagues, but the baseball field they had out there rivaled any major league ballpark in the nation at that time, other than the seating. There was only seating for about 6,000, I think it was. But the grass was perfect. They maintained it, and the lighting was excellent because most of the games were played at night, when the guys would come in after work. Excellent, though, and a lot of great baseball. A lot of great baseball was played there. And then I guess it would be just absolutely wrong not to mention something about the Auditorium, or I guess that's what the main name for the huge building that they put up virtually overnight. That's not quite true, but really within 2 or 3 days, they put up this huge building that they called the Auditorium. It had a regulation-sized gymnasium floor, and no seating and such as that, except around the perimeter. But they had many dances, big dances. They brought the Globetrotter basketball team in, and I'll have to ask Alice to help me with the name of the, what was the band leader?
Kay Kaiser.
Kay Kaiser, brought Kay Kaiser in. And to this day, as far as I know, the grand piano that they brought in for Kay Kaiser to use is still in what I know is Carmichael School.
Chief Joe.
Huh?
Chief Joe.
Chief Joe. Chief Joe?
No,
Yes.
Carmichael.
Chief Joe.
Okay. Anyway, the one on Lee Boulevard at the top of the hill, that building. So anyway, I guess that unless you have other questions,
I was just going to ask you, did you get to attend any of the baseball games or the auditorium and stuff around the auditorium at all?
a couple of the baseball games. Since they were at night, Mom and Dad kind of, rode herd on me a little bit there, but I did go to a couple of baseball games, and there was one ceremony there too that they brought the pilot and maybe one or two of his crew in who had been taken prisoner by the Japanese. They'd been shot down, and they'd been taken prisoner by the Japanese, but they were able to escape. And so for one of the war bond drives, they brought them in to talk to the people, and they had a big ceremony there. And it was in the evening. And speaking of war bonds, or war savings bonds and such as that, that was a big thing. That was a big thing there at Hanford, and for the kids as well as the adults. And so it was very well contributed to, really, or bought. A lot of war bonds there. So anyway, that was good. That was good. Good way to save money.
What about seeing the gentleman who had been shell shocked?
Oh,
Seeing how they dealt with him.
that was the only really sad thing that I remember from Hanford days. And then it was a passing thing, but one evening. Near me was all of a sudden a congregation of several of the, we'll call them police officers there at Hanford, had formed a ring around, and I'm talking about 10 or 12 of them, around this fairly young man, and well, as it turned out, he had been in the service, probably in Europe, and he went bonkers, and after, well, he had come to Hanford and went to work, but that evening he kind of went bonkers, and so these police officers just had to kind of slowly move in on him and get him under control, and I think they cuffed him and took him away. But that was sad because it was obvious that he thought that these were Germans that he was fighting. These were bad guys, and he was going to get all he could, and that was sad. But anyway, those things happen. Yeah. So I don't know if you have any other questions about Hanford there, or excuse me, I just thought of one thing. One wonderful, wonderful thing there at the Hanford town site. Well, let me back up. You're probably all aware of the fact that in 1943, when the government moved in, they really took over 3 little villages: Richland, Hanford, and White Bluffs. And Hanford and White Bluffs are, I think, separated by 6 miles or something like that of highway. But between Hanford and White Bluffs, and I suppose on either end of the, west of White Bluffs and east of Hanford too, orchard after orchard after orchard of just wonderful fruit: peaches, big Bing cherries, pears, apricots, wonderful fruit. And we had the opportunity to go out and pick, there during the summer of '43, I go out and pick and get your, and another thing, the track houses, the farmhouses that had to be abandoned, many of us went out and cut sod out of their lawns and put the sod around our trailer and watered it. It was great. It was great. And many of the houses that had been farmhouses, they were taken over by the upper military of the Army Corps of Engineers, and they lived there. Several guys in a house. But one thing that I understand is that every year the railroad would bring in, unless it was a bad winter and the apricots were frozen, they brought trains in to load up with apricots to send all over the country. LA, Texas, New York, because those were the earliest apricots in the country. And they were wonderful apricots too. And so they hit the mark, unless they got frozen out that winter, which I guess was very, very rare. Apparently that area around Hanford and White Bluffs, the air currents or whatever during the winter were carried fairly mild air, temperature-wise, and so anyway. But that was interesting. But
yeah. So it sounds like a lot. The farmhouses were still there, and
oh yes,
the crops or the
they eventually, probably in the late '40s, they cut all the orchards down, and so none of them existed. You can see a lot of stumps, but no orchards. And then interestingly, probably by 1948, you'd have never known that there was any barracks, wash houses, nothing. It was completely leveled, and today it's just a few little asphalt strips that you can see for where the various streets were and all. But yeah, that's it.
So was it just that first summer of '43 that you were able to pick the apricots and cherries and stuff?
Yeah.
Just that first summer?
Yeah, because by the No, I'm sorry. No, I beg your pardon. No, no. 43 and 44.
Okay.
I beg your pardon, but not 45 because we were out of there by March. But yeah, all of that summer of 43 and 44, yeah, it was great. And again, I think it's important to remember that virtually all of 1944, that Hanford town site was the largest, or the fourth largest city in the state of Washington. About 52,000 people. Yeah, there are a lot of men, women, and children. Yeah, but yeah,
Right.
yeah, that fruit was wonderful. Big cherries the size of quarters, and wonderful, wonderful fruit.
Well, is there anything you haven't had a chance to talk about yet that you'd like to still that we haven't talked about yet?
I just as it relates to the bond drives and all. Here's my mother saved this because my little fat face was in. But they had what they called the Sage Sentinel newspaper out there, and this was just an example. This is from June of 1944. It just showed some of us kids that had bought war bonds, and they had a little blurb there about that.
Okay.
But
We can probably get this on film.
yeah, or you might want to make a copy of it or whatever. You're welcome to if you like.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming in today.
Well,
and
my pleasure.
Sharing your stories and memories.
My
Really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. So thank you. Yeah. Hope I